Hey, everybody, it's Mike. Just a quick content note before we start the show. We do discuss stories of sexual abuse in today's episode. So if that's something you want to skip, then you might want to skip this episode. All right, let's start the show. We have found the millennial Gen X dividing line, and apparently it's TikTok.
Truth.
Welcome to Cult Favorite, the podcast where we will never ambush you with an Instagram live.
No. Okay. All right. That'll work.
I'm Mike Altman.
I'm Miranda Simmons.
I'm keeping that in.
All right.
And for this episode, we have a very recent docuseries, 3-part docuseries. We're going to do it in one episode on Netflix, Dancing for the Devil, about the 7M TikTok dance cult. And it was quite the documentary. These 3 episodes. It's an interestingly kind of packed 3-act play.
Wait, can you ask me what I know about it?
This is what. Yeah. So, what do you know?
Nothing.
Nothing. You know nothing.
I am coming in fresh.
What do you know about TikTok?
Nothing. I mean, okay, I know that there are videos and people dance a lot, but I don't know if they're always dancing.
Like they're always dancing. We just happen to video them, or
okay. Here's the thing.
These people have been dancing for 12 hours.
I'm just safe space, right? This podcast is a safe space. I don't have a TikTok account.
Yeah.
So I hope that doesn't mean that we have to stop talking now. I don't have a TikTok account. I know that people take videos and that they're short, right?
When you're hearing this podcast might have a TikTok account.
Oh my God.
Look for Cult Favorite Pod. So I have a TikTok account.
Okay.
And I didn't know what to do with it. And
when did you get it and why?
I got it because Twitter was boring.
Mm-hmm.
I was getting very bored of Twitter, or X. And so I was like, let's try TikTok. And what I've learned, and there's I find TikTok hilarious. As a consumer, I find TikTok hilarious.
I have Facebook. I was a very slow, petulant adopter of Facebook. And I was like, if I have to, do we really need something besides MySpace though, you guys? And so then I finally got on Facebook. Instagram I like much more than Facebook because it seems much more chill. People are not having big fraught conversations and arguing with each other. They probably are. But for me,
yeah,
my algorithm has become ocean sea animals and cocktail recipes and hot women.
Okay. I think you would like TikTok as a consumer if that's what you're interested in.
Okay, because
it has all of those.
In my self-description on Instagram, I identify as a social media slouch. So that's how I'm coming in.
I think you should just get a TikTok,
give it some space,
and just watch it.
Okay,
and let the algorithm learn, and then you will find amazing things come to you.
Okay.
That's what some of the funniest things I've ever seen. And experience. There's a whole thing.
I'm already watching all of these documentaries on streaming services when I probably shouldn't be. And maybe I'm actually concerned that if I watch one TikTok video, I'll become a monster. I'll fall in.
And I will say too, if you want some great cult content, there's a lot of mostly anti-cult tent. Can we call this podcast?
No. I knew you were going to say that. No, the answer is no.
Well, you don't have a TikTok, so whatever I put in our bio there, you won't even know.
That's true.
#culttent.
That's true.
But no, there's a lot of anti-cult content. There's a lot of anti-cult content where I'm like, that's not really a cult. Maybe I don't know. But who am I to say? I found TikTok to be so much work. I can have a dumb thought and put it on Twitter, and it's like I just type it out. And I'm also used to an internet where you don't see me.
It's more passive.
I'd rather just be unseen, sending out dumb thoughts into the world, which is why I love Twitter until it kind of got broken. And TikTok, like, oh, first of all, people can see me, which makes me very very self-conscious. And then second of all, it's like a thing. Like, you're now making content. It's like a small video.
So you actually feel the relationship with viewers in real time in a different way.
I feel very much more performative, and the performative nature is much more explicit, and that makes me uncomfortable because I don't yet know what I want to perform there that would be interesting. And it's very much driven by like, what's your niche and your content, your audience? I don't know.
So we're going to actually start talking about this documentary, I swear to God.
But I think it's connected.
Well, okay, so I want to take a just hot second to actually pull out the word performative, because I think a lot of times, and I think that that's what's so interesting to me about social media and my viewing experience of this documentary, because when I say like, I know nothing, I'm a total social media slouch, that is not at all to say that it doesn't have like a super interesting function, that it's not like playing an important role in society in this moment, Like, so I don't want to be guilty of that kind of generational logic of, because I am not exposed to or savvy about this thing, that must mean that the thing is stupid. I do not mean that. Yeah. One of the things that I find so interesting about it, and that I think that we can actually see performativity as a technical term. So here's your hot like minute for theory. Your hot take for theory, I don't know, is that
hot theory.
I think that, a lot of times people have come to think about performative, like use that word as this means I'm just performing.
Right.
When the whole vibe with performativity, the reason it became a term like used in a theoretical way was because what Judith Butler was talking about was the phenomenon of our social performances creating and consolidating a semblance of a stable self. Right. And that's as good as we've got. And that doesn't mean that it's not real then. Right. Like,
yes,
that has very real consequences in the world. But that it's never like, here's my performance out here, and that's what's superficial or fake.
Right.
And this is the real person that I am outside of this thing, and that's authentic. And so I think that social media creates this really interesting dynamic in which we see that division so much more starkly, that people kind of set up, this is what you are for social media, and so that's just fake, and this is who you are for real, and that's genuine, and this other thing. But it also shows just how false that divide is.
Right. Yeah.
Because this is how people are coming into themselves, and how they're coming of age, and how they're learning about themselves and each other, and communicating about the world that they live in, and
Right. Like, there's always a you observing you, and
right.
it's always one removed, and you can move that observer one space further back each time.
And those interactions have consequences. And like, they do have dynamics.
Yeah, and it's how we now understand ourselves in a variety of ways. And I think that's why I struggle with TikTok. I don't know what my performance. I can perform.
So
I can perform snide asshole.
You're an accidental influencer, and I'm a social media slouch.
So
we are going to have a lovely conversation then about this documentary.
And yes. No, and I think I'm gonna.
It's good. It'll mean balance.
I'm gonna try to avoid, because there's so much. I'm gonna try to avoid too much pro wrestling comparisons, but we'll see.
So what's the vibe? What do we need to know about this to have a conversation about it?
So I think it's actually one of the things I think they did well here is it is nicely divided up into kind of an overall 3 movements that work narratively very well. So the first movement you open with a kind of our white girl in peril, Miranda Wilking, soon to be Miranda Derrick, thank you, and her sister Melanie, and this lovely family and this lovely brick home. Everything's so lovely, and the story of these two sisters who are a couple years apart, and they're dancing, and they become TikTok influencers on their own as dancers, and they begin to get brands, and then Miranda graduates high school and decides to go to Los Angeles, which is where you go to make it. And
she was on like Dancing with the Stars or something, or So You Think You Can Dance or something.
Yeah,
something,
there's
something,
there's
something.
not
Dancing with the Stars. So
you
I don't
think
know,
you
one
can
of
dance,
those. Yeah,
and then there's a whole thing about dance competition TV shows that plays into this in the side on the sort of a piece of this. And while in LA, she comes crosses paths with a number of other dancers, mostly black dancers, coming up through the crump scene, which we'll probably talk a little bit about. And then through the content creation collaboration mode, crosses paths with Isaiah Shin, whose father, Robert Shin, runs this church called Shekinah, and then also eventually a management company called 7M. And so the whole first episode is the story of how Miranda joined 7M. The other dancers who have since left 7M give a lot of, I almost said ITMs, which is like the in the moment. That's the interview they talk about.
I was going to ask. I don't know what that means.
It's
bad at social media, bad at acronyms.
That's from the Bachelor, the ITMs. But they do all these sort of talking head interviews. There's one Rolling Stone reporter. There's like no talking heads in this documentary. We don't get any cult experts.
Yeah.
And it kind of ends on this cliffhanger with another Melanie Lee, saying, "Oh my God, he's doing it again." That segues to the second episode, which is really a story of the Lee sisters, Melanie and Priscilla, who are immigrants from Korea, who kind of grow up in the church in search for a family. Their father abandons them. Their mother brings them to the United States and falls into alcoholism and gambling, and they basically raise each other. And this is something that I've actually learned recently from Mihi Kim Kaur, a colleague of ours who works on Korean Christianity, about this kind of role that Korean churches play, not like Shekinah churches, but mainstream Korean churches play, in the role of the church as a community center. So it makes complete sense to me in light of that. So that these sisters grew up there, and eventually Melanie leaves because there's this basically insane labor abuse where they're working for like $100 a week, but they're working 80 hours a week, and like not unskilled labor, like running real estate companies and mortgage firms and like all sorts of stuff. And so Melanie leaves, Priscilla stays, and
unwelcome sexual solicitation.
Well, that's
what I was going to
get to. Yeah. So because
that was Melanie's problem, and then it becomes
and then it becomes where Priscilla deals with not just solicitation, but really horrible sexual abuse. So the second episode sort of culminates with Priscilla finally leaving, which she literally leaves while they're filming this documentary. She starts off, she's still in Shekinah at the time when they start the filming, and then she leaves. And then the third episode is I wrote it down as like Avengers Unite. It was like the dancers meet the Korean sisters, and together they realize what a terrible person Robert Shin is, and they start to sort of join forces, and you get this almost like a Ocean's 11 scene of trying to find him at a Korean restaurant that used to be a Pizza Hut from its architecture, and serve him a lawsuit that is currently pending. I think it goes to trial next year, and that's sort of the high point, I think, of the whole thing, is that they've served him this thing, and then there's
it's like subpoenas are issued, and pseudo solutions are, I don't know. It's like they come to a place, but nothing gets resolved.
There is a moment where like a dozen women interrupt a church service, screaming, accusing Robert Shin of sexual abuse. And then this leads everyone just trying to go to the police about the sexual abuse. And the police say, we need like more women's testimonies. And so more and more women. So one of the subplots is, will Priscilla go forward because she has a horrific story?
One of the things that I there are several things about this documentary that I was like, yeah, 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 but what about? And one of those whatabouts was the fact that, yeah, like this handful of girls like busts into the church service, according to Melanie's story. And but yet they can't find like more than one person to go to the police.
Right.
And like, where are
Yeah.
those girls? We didn't follow up with them. We don't know
I
who they are or
wonder-
where they are.
There's one anonymous person. There's 2 times
That
they
they
speak to
speak,
an anonymous
yeah.
person. It's unclear if it's the same anonymous person, but one goes forward, one says no. But yeah, it seems to be that there should be a lot of these. And also, I mean, I will say, we don't like the Santa Ana Police Department comes off as just like
Very Keystone Cops. It was like
horrible.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
'Cause
no,
it was,
like
yeah.
they're making women tell the story multiple times to multiple people, male officers coming in and out of the room, nothing that is at all like trauma informed. It's like, some of the worst examples of how bad, like the worst stereotypes of like the victims feeling like, oh, I feel like I was the one being, investigated, and all of this. Like, we should be, the system is so utterly broken. We take it for granted how broken it is, but it was evident there too. And so it kind of ends with like, we're going to sue his ass, and like a bunch of the dancers have left. And I hope, and Melanie hopes Miranda will come to her wedding.
Right.
As far as the Melanie Miranda story, our white girl in peril and our white family in peril, Miranda comes to Christmas as long as they don't talk about Shekinah.
So let me interrupt real
Yeah.
quick just to say, like, I think it's implicit in what we're saying, but in case it's not clear, the whole thing about when we first meet the Wilking sisters and they're dancing together and they're super sweet and they have this very loving, affectionate relationship, and they are like literally and figuratively in sync, like they are following each other's moves in so many ways. So the whole thing, though, then becomes Miranda, after she joins Shekinah Church, cuts off ties with her family.
Yes.
And so we initially see this sister pair, and then it kind of cuts immediately to 3 years later, and we see Melanie with her parents talking about how they haven't heard from Miranda in so long, and she won't talk to them. And in their storytelling of this experience, there was a pretty abrupt and severe familial disconnect, like a decision to be made.
And the big moment there is in 6 months after Miranda sort of is cutting off ties, they go onto Instagram Live and sort of plead and at this point, and it's more Melanie, the Wilking sisters were a social media brand with, 1 million or so, I don't know how many millions followers at the time, 1 or 2 or whatever. And so they have an audience that they go to with this story. And this is when the story initially kind of breaks out in the kind of kind of that celebrity reality show, influencer, media culture, like People Magazine, People.com, Daily Beast, Us Weekly. So it's showing up there initially. The Cut actually has an amazing article we'll link to that came out before the documentary came out that has way more in-depth and some interesting things that we may talk about as we go. So it breaks out there first, and that's actually, that video is what prompts the filmmakers to reach out to the Wilking family, and then away we go with this. Then they go to Netflix to get the green light, and they didn't even know what the ending was going to be when they started it. And so you have the Instagram video sort of plea, and then at the end you have the Christmas where Miranda comes home, and Miranda's now short blonde hair to her sister's long dark hair, in this sort of interesting contrast. And then when she comes home, she does this sort of panoramic video, and the parents are playing along, and they're all in matching pajamas at Christmas with gifts. But if you look really, really closely at the video, Melanie, the sister who sort of stayed, is not engaging. She's literally on her phone the whole time on this. And so there's this kind of she doesn't, and she kind of has a comment at the end where you feel this is she's like, I don't want to go along with this thing where she gets to come hang out here and we're not going to talk about her cult, and just because my parents want to see her and whatever.
Melanie says at one point, I really want a genuine relationship, not just for social media. And I found that really interesting because of, I mean, what I was talking about earlier, this dynamic of genuine versus fake, social media versus
Yeah.
reality is like I don't know how to wrap my brain around it because it's so far removed from the way, like the just general context in which I lived my own teenage
Yeah.
years, where
Yeah.
there was like a lot of plaid and eye rolls and black fingernail polish
Right.
and so in the 90s, that kind of like authority Gen Xy vibe is something now that I don't know how to make sense of. The like when I was watching the documentary, I felt like I was, like you said, like watching a reality show, and I felt engaged in that kind of way because I think that the screen almost becomes its own persona, becomes its own character, or at least
Yeah.
becomes its own presence
Yeah.
in the in a way that is reality TV genre rather than like found footage or something.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. You would think that the way it's shot, where so much of the action is happening in sort of real time, right? Like they're literally, whether it's the footage that the Wilkings make of them like trying to track down the house, like, oh, that has the water tower, like whatever, and like find the house where Brenda's at, or like the conversations that Priscilla has with her dad or Priscilla and Melanie have, you would think that it would feel like you're kind of there. A lot of the shots switch to sort of these, rectangular Instagram shots or TikTok shots in the documentary. It's like you're watching. It's like you're watching a play on film, right? As opposed to watching. It's not Blair Witch, right? Like for like a comparison of like the fake found footage
Right.
situation. It's or even it's not Cops or some like this is happening on Patrol Live, which you just have to watch with my in-laws, which is very hard for me as an abolitionist to have to watch on Patrol Live. All that to say is like there's this extra, like you're saying, this extra level, and I don't know, is that me? Like how much of the audience is in on it,
right.
and how much of the audience, both of the documentary and then of the videos, like how many of them are in on it and how many aren't? Like,
I mean, what I noticed is that I just found myself experiencing it narratively as a different thing. It's not that I didn't know they were real people. It's not that these abuses inside of this church aren't real. It's not that it's not that. It's that
right.
it does something different to the structure of a story where there is this, it's like the omniscient narrator becomes an overt presence
Yeah.
in a way that is not detached and neutral. And it also, the fact that you are relating in real time to people, like that's the interesting thing, because again, it's not, I mean, it's so easy to say that's just screens, social media isn't real relationships, blah blah blah. But like on a different level, it collapses the distance. It creates this really close proximity because now you are interacting in real time synchronously with however many people are also online watching you at the time. And so one of the things that I found interesting about it, and I guess something that changes the feeling of it, the affect of the way that this story comes across, is that you see so much more than you do in other, I guess, documentaries like this. You see so much response from whatever their reaction is to what's happening, whether they're concerned about it, whether they're celebrating it, whatever, that their followers are participating
Yeah.
in this familial story. So it's not just a
Yeah.
familial story anymore. And they're asking, you know, we've talked a lot about how these stories tend to be about a person instead of a structure. All of those responses are very concerned with the people, you know?
Yeah.
And they want to weigh in on like whether she's being brainwashed or whether she's just living her life or whether this or whether that. And I don't know, that's its own. I guess I find it I mean, I'm sure I make presumptions about people all the time, but like
Yeah.
it just doesn't occur to me like
The whole thing is haunted by the followers of this sort of unmarked but always present audience.
Yeah, they're not getting interviewed, but they're always weighing in.
And they're not the audience watching this documentary on Netflix.
Mhm.
Right. And so there's like and there's certainly overlap. And I think, you know, Miranda has since posted a response video that talks about getting horrible death threats from people and
because of this documentary.
And it's put her in danger and all these things. And so there's a way that like the documentary itself, and this is where the Wilkins role in it is, I think, as to this, is itself part of the kind of social media story world that is documented in the film, but is also participating in it. And then there's audience members like us for the documentary who are, I did not know who any of these people were before this documentary. So we're watching it that way, but then there are people who are watching it because this is the next chapter. This is the next beat in this ongoing story that started with that first Instagram Live, or that started with the sisters when they were together and then they separated. And why did they separate, right? With which raises all these questions about like, well, it's interesting because that Melanie, like the thing you had from Melanie about a genuine relationship, it's like, it's not just that she lost her sister, she lost her business partner, right? And there's questions of like, well, can Melanie make like, can Melanie make it on her own?
Which we should say, though, in the response that Miranda has given, it is a very different, like she has a very different story about that as well. She says that Melanie locked her out of the account and that she tried to get back in and she wouldn't let her and da da da. So
and then the online back and forth of all of this completely hides the horrible abuse I gotta back with my horrible abuse happening no matter what about Miranda or Melanie or our white family in peril. There are other people that we know were horribly abused.
So I think that the moment that captures all of those dynamics and this whole phenomenon that we're talking about in a moment is when, because that the Christmas home video was wild to me, but the one that I think captures it so perfectly is when, like, initially Robert Shin, the pastor, says you need to cut ties with your families because you need to die to yourself, and anything that reminds you of yourself is something that you need to cast off. Da, 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 da. So basic like stereotype of like cult leader making people leave their homes and lives as they know them. But then after the Wilkins post that video and express their concern, and a bunch of people then start weighing in and responding to it and freaking out. Now Robert Shin changes tactic and says, hey, members, instead, let's actually do a charm offensive. And I think he calls them like, you need to act like spies or something at one point.
Yeah.
And you need to go talk to your families. You need to show them that you're okay. You need to hang with them just enough so that they get off our backs. So Miranda does this. And she goes to meet her parents. And in that space, when she goes to meet her parents, we see the encounter through her live stream. Like we see it through her screen. We don't ever get a different view than that. And when we do, the dad comes up, and they haven't seen their daughter in however long at this point. They're concerned for her safety. They're super worried. Their family has been splintered apart as they know it. They come up and they immediately address the phone. They address the camera. But what I find so fascinating about their address is that the dad uses second person. Like, okay, Miranda says, like, so what do you want to say? And the dad's like, that, we love you and we support you. And the mom chimes in with third person. Yeah, we love her and we want her back and da 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 da. Now, I'm not suggesting anything about anybody's level of sincerity or lack thereof, care or whatever. I don't think that there is, removal of sincerity by use of narrative person. But I think it captures so completely this dynamic of multiple layers of subjectivity and relationality.
Yeah.
And the way that all of that gets filtered through this arbiter of relational exchange. Like, there is the screen is always a mediator between whatever's happening.
And I'll see your phone camera and raise you. There's this scene that I found very bizarre near the end, where mom and dad are watching old home videos on a TV, like laying down on their elbows on this tiny little TV, watching home videos of their daughters, and it's like, and laughing about it, and it's like no one fucking does that. Like,
it's the Clark Griswold scene in Christmas Vacation where he gets stuck in the attic and he starts looking at old family video reels, like with his rubber gloves to stay warm.
Yeah, but except the director was like, hey, because like they've used all these videos throughout. Like, the role of recorded video, whether it's digital or whatever, VHS, like, old, like America's Funniest Home Videos, Bob Saget style, whatever it is, like, is always, and is like sort of the ingredients for the whole documentary.
Mm-hmm.
We see a lot of home videos of them dancing, all this. So there's this interesting sense of like these girls have always been on film, always being filmed in these ways. And then there's but that moment of like the camera, us, the audience, through the camera, watching them watch a TV of their daughters and laughing together in a way that's like no one actually does that, right? It's like that moment when they like in like a HGTV show where the person comes into the front door and they knock on the door and they open the door and there's a camera on the other side, and you're like, how,
right?
Like,
I don't know what people do. I do what I do know. What even are people? What I do know is that there is it's not like I'm suggesting that there's an unmediated, pure space of human exchange.
right.
Outside of a camera or a phone or a microphone or whatever, like there's always filters that are mediating your experience. Always, 100% of the time. It's just that the screen, I think, and what we know about how these platforms work creates this whole other layer of who's present for this experience. And I think so much of the time when we learn about groups that we come to call cults, the story is much more insular. It's this thing that's happening only among this group of insiders. And then here's what's happening for their families outside. But there's not the way that, the Wilking parents were able to find where she was by looking at the background of a video that she posted and then contact another member's parents by virtue of who was tagged and whatever. Like those layers of access and participation, I think just are so there's just so much more scaffolding of how this story plays out then. But I think so often we tend to collapse all of that into a sort of dismissive social media, it's so fake. And I actually think that I think that we're tempted to do that because it's so complicated.
Yeah. And it's as if we're not performing every time we all the time, constantly, all the time anyway. For ourselves and other. Yeah. I mean, I think, and it's what I thought was an interesting moment. Because it does, they want to try to draw, like the documentary wants to sort of draw you in with the story of these two, good-looking sisters, and this lovely, everything's so lovely, and then it's not lovely, and it's like, oh my God, that could happen to my lovely family, and oh God, it's TikTok, which is this, which it has its own resonances in the current moment, and then there's the moment at the end of the first episode when Melanie Lee shows up and says, "Oh, he's doing it again," and you get these other sisters. Mm-hmm. To me, it's like I had very little concern for our white family in peril, which maybe that's just a me thing, but like I was like really worried. Like if we're thinking about like sort of my effective relationship to the documentary, it's Melanie and Priscilla who I find myself more interested in and concerned for than the story of Miranda and Melanie, even though Miranda is actually the one who is still in this thing that we know to be abusive. But the idea that Shin had been running this church since for like 20 years at this point, to hear the interview with Priscilla where she talks about like, I was convinced that if I left, I would go to hell. And then her story of having really no family to look for her, right? And then as you hear more about the dancers who had joined, who had no real family, one of them, B Dash, who ends up marrying Miranda, is still involved with Shekinah and 7M, had been a part of an earlier dance troupe connected to a culty church before this that also had recruited a bunch of young black men from Los Angeles, South Central Los Angeles. So there's a whole backstory there that goes kind of unmentioned. And so there's all these people who have as bad, if not worse, stories than the Wilkings, who would never have actually no one would give a shit about their stories. Some of whom had already done this once before in another cult. And it's only because of the three lovely white faces in that Instagram live that we ever get to hear about any of these other people. Mm-hmm.
I don't disagree. I think, and Priscilla is the sister she remains a member of Shekinah for like over 20 years. She's in it for a long time. And yeah, I think you're right about like this interesting juxtaposition between two stories of two sisters. Priscilla and Melanie have a way more harrowing story about growing up in a family that did not feel as connected or consolidated as the Wilkings. And even there, though, like, so Priscilla at one point goes back to South Korea to confront her father, and it's presented as like part of her own journey. And like, take nothing away from that. I don't know what her journey is and her process is. I imagine that it is like, I don't envy it, whatever it looks like. But that conversation was just another moment that I found really mediated by the presence of a camera.
Have you ever watched Love is Blind?
No.
You would hate it probably, but if those out there who've watched Love is Blind, this is more and more proof that my taste in media is just total garbage.
Listen,
But
I mean, this is where our Venn diagrams of respective media consumption, the Venn diagram that like overlaps is cult documentaries.
That's right.
It overlaps right here.
That's
So
exactly
that's why
where
we're
it
talking.
overlaps.
Yeah.
I mean,
This is where the Criterion Collection meets The Bachelor, everybody.
Yes, reality television, especially The Bachelor and other love shows, professional wrestling, and cult documentaries. That's all I. That's all I do. That's all I watch. People are like, "Have you seen the latest prestige drama on HBO?" And I'm like, "No, I was busy watching Perfect Match."
That is not and
But-
meanwhile, I'm not interested in what anybody's watching, and I'm just kind of sitting in my little introvert cave, like watching French art house lesbian drama. I don't know.
I'd watch that. Yeah,
Sure.
Now we've got
probably for very different
I think
reasons.
we just made
Who
our
knows?
trailer.
No. Wrong.
But all that is but there's this trope in Love Is Blind, where they will have either like some important conversation like between two of the people in the show or a person and a parent, and it's like at a bar. It's very much like this at a bar, and you get the sense that like they were like, all right, this is the time to have this conversation about, what you think about so and so, or this is the time to have that conversation about the fight you had last night or whatever. And that's what that conversation, that's what it felt like, right?
It just was very, and again, none of the reader response, here's how this landed for me is, I feel it really necessary to say that doesn't mean that then I'm suggesting that this is what reality is. I have no idea, right? But it had, it was so, the conversational paces, and maybe it lasted for 3 hours, right? We don't know how it was edited, but it was translated and edited into such an abrupt, like, pacing of this is how you like failed our family.
Yeah.
That's why I became a member of this church. I know that you've been trying to contact me, and I appreciate that. Also, it's your fault. Please don't touch me. Like, when
I was watching it with my partner, and she goes, "Wow, she's a lot."
That's the thing though, right? So then you feel the most for this person that then you also end up coming away feeling like is a lot. And I think that that's so indicative of, again, that screen as a presence that is really pulling a lot of strings and wielding a lot of power that makes somebody's individual agency or sense of receiving and responding to information or other people's feelings or whatever it is, just a very different process.
And I think there's a way that I watch reality television or watch, like, one of the ways that I watch reality television or watch pro wrestling is like my evaluation of the execution of the sleight of hand, right? So how well did you get me to buy in that this is real, even though I know all of it real, quote unquote, right? Even though I know that it's all
real,
staged and predetermined, and like producers are like, I'll watch The Bachelor. I know a producer made that happen, right? But that was interesting, and I'm glad that happened because it made the show better. I found myself watching this documentary as it went along with much more of that brain.
Right.
That I expected or wanted to, because that's not a very sympathetic brain.
No, I think that's right.
Like, that's not the brain I want to watch stories that are documenting real abuses and real harms and real traumas with. And I think that's what I found kind of, but it's also, I think, what made it a very Netflix documentary. Like, the music, I don't know if the music was like very much the music of Netflix reality television in terms of, like, I don't know if it was the same music, like actual groups, but a lot of it had the same vibes as those reality shows. And so it was sort of borrowing from these different pop culture genres in a way that, like, other documentaries in this, like, in one of the interviews, the director actually said, like, because we were filming it as it was happening, it wasn't looking back on something that happened decades ago. We thought we were offering something new to the cult doc genre. So like, we actually have a genre to talk about, which is great. Like that was his language. So this is a thing. If he's saying that, that's a thing that network streaming executives are saying. So it means that, like, we're right on top of things having this podcast. But B, that I think there was a purpose to that presentation you're describing and that I'm seeing, like, aesthetically, to say, like, not all, like, this is the cult doc for a particular kind of Netflix
consumer audience
that we think overlaps with a certain kind of TikTok consumer. And so those resonances were there, which I think is interesting when those resonances just sort of bounce back unrecognized, because I don't think that you're, I mean, you tell me, I don't think you're that consumer. I'm sort of that consumer, but more ironically, or at least I think more ironically. Maybe that's the whole point. But it does, I mean, it keeps coming back to me of, like, how many people who watch the documentary are invested in the Miranda and Melanie story world, that is its own kind of story world, and how many are coming at it, and maybe are coming at it from interested in these sort of cult story world, and it sort of hits all these different buttons.
I mean, it probably doesn't even warrant being said, but I'm gonna say it anyway. Like, Melanie and Miranda, I mean, influencers in general, like, their whole vibe is that they are savvy curators of these story worlds that you're talking about. And so, again, without having, like, anything at all to say about anyone's level of sincerity or prioritization or whatever, like, this is maybe the only time that I've actually sought out influencer Instagram accounts. It was a fascinating.
It's going to destroy your
It was
algorithm.
really.
There go your drink recipes.
It's about to get way
you'll
straighter.
Get more hot women and less drink recipes.
Except in very, like, hetero circles, but
yeah,
that's all right. The the way that the way that their online personas are curated remain, at least again, Miranda's doing her thing. She's always been doing, and whatever that thing is, but for Melanie, who is part of this family, who like, really steers the ship on this documentary motivation, her stuff is not now, like, she didn't shift from product placement and dance videos to, I am now going to launch my own cult watch and be concerned about, like, finding victims and giving my platform to spaces for da-da-da-da-da. Like, she's still curating a very specific story world. Like, she never left that story world. And I'm not saying she should. I'm just...
That's how I know that she didn't grow up religious. Because if she had been... I'm telling you, because that would have been the pivot. It would be like, this is my chance. I bet she would have...
interesting.
Like, the pivot would have been, and now I am on the front lines of anti-cult stuff, and I'm on the front lines of spiritual abuse.
Do you think?
I don't know that she's got it in her. Like, I know that she's got that. I don't know that she knows how to create that content, and maybe that's the reason not to pivot. But to me, that's where the money, like super cynical Mike is saying, that's where the money's at.
Well, I think, though, that she, who did not get sucked up into Shekinah, and she talks about, her own chance to have done so, but then how she was like, not for me. But that she follows a similar path of being guided by a space ultimately that is going to advance a very specific priority.
Yeah.
And whatever other priorities exist inside of Shekinah, we know that, and what we hear, I think, so compellingly from so many of the dancers that got brought into this 7M organization that Shin created was that they were about pursuing and promoting a brand.
Yeah.
And so they wanted to be content creators. They wanted to be given space to keep creating. You know, the fact that they were all in LA and like here was also a church community that you could fold into that dynamic, like that was bonus. That was great. But their initial entree, like their point of entry was very much the building of a specific mode of content creation.
Yeah.
And you know, sure, that makes plenty good sense. Melanie is doing the same thing. It just isn't inside of a space led by Robert Shin with and so I think it's a I guess it's one of those interesting moments of that really dramatizes the conversation that people have about cults in the first place of like, you know, aren't we all swayed by things?
Right.
Aren't we all subject to compelling leaders and rhetoric? Don't we all want to find community, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah.
And that, you know, part of the reason that when we're trying to be careful about using the label cult, like part of the reason that we try to take care is because a lot of times that word will be attached to groups that have a lot in common with a lot of other groups that we think are totally like valid and legit and fine.
Yeah.
Which is, again, not to take anything away from, like, yeah, Robert Shin is, you know, the sexual solicitation and grooming that was, at least, you know, that victims came forward and talked about is partnered with an extreme history of financial and economic exploitation, labor exploitation, and then doctoring documentation to make that look okay when it wasn't. I just think that that's probably happening in a lot of the companies that give influencers the products that they promote also.
No,
you know what I mean?
I think
and
you're
because
right.
It's not attached to a church, we're just not,
and
you know.
This is Melanie's, like in some ways, this is Melanie's job. So like if you're, just because your sister joins a cult doesn't mean you stop being like a plumber or whatever your job. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, yeah. And the other thing is that a lot of the black dancers who were in 7M, like B-Dash, who's still in 7M, Concrete that was mentioned, they were in an earlier dance group called Street Kingdom that was associated with like a church called Hospitality run by a guy named David Gurley. The Cut article that we'll link to has a whole thing on this. But Gurley was who had a lot of the same like financial and labor abuses that Shin does. He would not have let them work in industry. His whole pitch was like, industry is bad. Also, I'm the only way to heaven. You're going to go to hell without me. I'm the man of God. Like same thing. Like, and then they all went on the TV dance competition, America's Best Dance Crew. And he had said, like, well, we'll let you go on. God is going to let you go on here because you're going to win it. And it was like $100,000 prize. So Gurley's like, I got to get that money. And so, but they lose after all their prayer and Bible study. And then the dancers are like, that's the moment they're like, oh, this guy's stupid. He's not really connected. God would have wanted us to win. God forbid they had won. Like this is never happened. And so, God forbid. So, so Shin, I don't know if you knew this, but immediately is connecting them with brands. Like I've seen the Toyota commercial that they're talking about, right? And those brands are where that ability to connect them to these brands to make money, that's where his real claim to having power as a man of God, like he's giving them success, they're making money. That's where that kind of comes from. And I think what's not mentioned is like the lawsuits, even if somebody in the DA's office actually does press these charges, like that's not going to really be what hurts Robert Shin. It's going to be the brands pulling out of hiring 7M people, which I think has begun to happen in the last couple of months. It looks like, And so in some sense, if the point of the documentary, at least from the Wilking perspective, is to basically ruin Shin such that Miranda will leave, the documentary's role in separating 7M dancers who now no longer put 7M in their profiles, all these things, from corporate brands is the only real way to take him down. Right. And so it's very much a story of this late capitalist hellscape we live in, where we have all of these gig jobs that promise so much money that are still reliant on, like, the idea that to be a financially successful dancer requires you to court corporate brand collaborations on another corporately owned social media platform is such an ass backwards way to fund the arts as a society.
Sure.
Right. But it's what makes this whole thing possible. And that's really, I think, the only way that you're going to see, someone like Shin come down. And it also raises, I think, the question of like, and I don't have again, we have no way of actually knowing. Like, we know, I believe what all these women have said about Shin as being this, and his abuses and all of that.
Sure.
We don't know to what extent Miranda is aware or not, we have heard nothing about this, right? And there is a level of which, because she is so talented and because she is so attractive and she is so good at this form, to what point she's actually been able to now, is she actually using Shin, right? Like, I don't know. It's hard.
Well, one of the things that there were a few, I think that this documentary is really interesting to me for lots of reasons, but it carried a lot of little moments that I really, that I wish I had more information about.
Yeah.
One of them is just what made, like, we heard a lot in the Hillsong documentary about just exactly why Carl Lentz was so compelling.
Right.
We don't really hear a lot about Robert Shin in terms of why he was compelling. He was attaching them to brands for sure, but they had the followers and stuff already. We get these little clips from his sermons that say nothing.
And I want to know where they got those clips from.
And if they have those clips, then where's I don't know. I don't know where this rabbit hole exists. So someone links something that then can take me there. But I want to hear the rest of his sermon. Like, I want to hear what made him a compelling speaker, what made him an exciting rhetorician, what gave him a kind of, but like you said, the churches have always been pretty small.
Right.
So maybe there isn't much of a stage presence, but I
think
that was something that I was like, what?
I think my complete guess based on what's presented in the documentary, is that the son, who had videography skills and was in Los Angeles, happened upon a bunch of marks and maybe even knew the other dancers from the previous cult and was like, oh, well, we can, like, I don't know. Like, that's a question for Isaiah Shin, who I know spoke to the directors but wouldn't go on camera.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that, like, he fell back into this group of young people, and he had money. He had a lot of money. And so he could create this sort of creator house that itself looked kind of like Love Island or one of these reality shows or something for them to create in. And then that was what they need. Like, I got the sense that they were kind of just sitting through the dinners and the church services at first, at least, to get to the creation tools, really. Although some of those young men especially had come up through the Crump scene that has this religious spiritual component that I think I don't know anything about, and I want to know a lot more about, that might have primed them for this. Like, they talk about, like, I want to get back to the church, I want to get back to God. So I really think that this was like, in some ways, he could have kept exploiting Korean immigrants, 50 at a time, and probably gotten away with it and had no one notice. But he happened into he happened into these dancers, and
There was also mention that he was a doctor. Like,
yeah, he's talking. Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know.
Like, what kind of doctor?
Right. I don't know.
I'm a doctor. We're both doctors.
There are a lot of unanswered questions. I will say, completely unrelatedly, except maybe that I did find him a compelling rhetorician. My favorite interview was with Marquis Richardson, who was like Melanie Lee's one friend that she was able to have when she joined Shekinah way back in the day. And like they had to leave their family and everything was very insular and you could only be friends with members of the church, but she was allowed like one friend. Yeah. and her one friend was Marquis, and he was we've been talking about all of these layers of relationality and screen subversion and whatever. He's like the most analog human character who
motherfucker had a baseball bat.
He's like, I'm gonna take you out whenever you want to leave, and he never like. They don't interview him often. There's not a ton that he's able to say. I just love how like face value he is about. He's never saying like, well, here's why I think that she was really, wrapped into and she had a hard family life and this was whatever. And I really felt for her because, and here's why it was just like, I went once, it wasn't my vibe. She was into it. I told her I'm here for her.
What?
She calls him up and she's like, I want to leave tomorrow. And he shows up in a van with a bat. And he's like, I don't know what I was going to do with the bat, but I would have used it if I needed to.
Well,
and he just takes
like,
her.
This is when I'm going to need the bat.
Him.
We all need a friend who will show up with a baseball bat in their trunk for us.
We all need that. And I felt like in this ocean of social media, amorphous, like everything is part of everything else. Here was this, a little lighthouse, beacon of singularity.
We have no judgments about what's real or fake, but Marquise's baseball bat is the most real thing.
Very real.
Well, and I'll say too, he had, actually that should have been our intro, is welcome to Cult Favorite.
Where we will show up for you
baseball bat in our trunk.
If you need us in a van with a bat.
Any final takeaways from this?
I mean, I guess my takeaway is social media seems like it is this just incredible meeting. It's where like all of these seeming opposites converge. And I think that we should swim in the complexity a little bit instead of flatlining it into something that either connects people or distances people. It doesn't either kill communication or provide access to millions of humans. It's like it's both and neither nor also, because like it's such a complicated machine that I don't think has been around for long enough for us to have a lot of sophisticated language for. And I think we still, speaking of like the way that we privilege individuals over structures conversationally when we encounter social phenomena, I think that when we encounter the just ginormous machine of social media platforms, it's so much easier to talk about the humanity of this or that influencer, or what happens to one's humanity and individuality when they are on that platform. It's distancing me, or it's connecting me, or it's about, we keep such a laser focus on a person, and we fail to look at a structure. And I think that so too, the way that these groups, religious or otherwise, form and fashion community is something so much more complicated than just,
Yeah.
an individual doing this or that.
Yeah. I think I'll piggyback off that a little bit and say I think it's for me it's the premise of this entire podcast project that the things that seem frivolous and seem like the things that seem frivolous or like trash culture are actually way more complicated and worth the attention of those of us interested in culture and society in ways that maybe we aren't always aware or we're dismissive of. And so I'd much rather talk, there's as much going on with, this documentary and these dancers and these videos and all of this as there is with, I don't know, like whatever Succession or what, I don't know, whatever people are watching that I'm not, And so I think we should continue to pay close, like just because all the articles that I pulled up when I was looking into this were from like, People and Us Weekly and Daily, doesn't mean it's not worth our attention in these ways. So
my other takeaway is that I am exhausted just by talking about people's experiences on social media without even having many of my own. I don't know that I'm more compelled to join TikTok now. I must be honest, but I'll do it for the cause of the podcast.
I think it's worth
maybe
just consuming
possibly
TikTok.
Or maybe you could have like a hologram of me that interacts with you for TikTok purposes.
We'll do AI Miranda on TikTok.
I mean, she won't do as much upspeak probably. She'll say like less. Okay. I have a cult favorite to share.
What's your cult favorite?
My cult favorite is a book by the brilliant Lauren Elkin, and it is called Art Monsters: Unruly Bodies in Feminist Art.
Ooh.
Speaking of women who are fashioning themselves as public for public consumption, who render their bodies in specific ways inside of a patriarchal structure, this gives a very different context for thinking about those issues. And so she's thinking about how how feminist artists specifically have used art to think about not only patriarchy but their own aesthetics and their own subjectivity, and it's just a really lovely read. And she's a terrific writer, and a dear friend recommended it to me, and I'm enjoying it very much.
Awesome. We'll put a link to that somewhere.
Yeah.
I'm going to recommend my cult favorite is an app that I use almost every day that I discovered a while back. It's called Stoic, STOIC, then with a period. And it is a journaling, but also meditation app where it has a kind of these built-in sort of like, let's start your day or evening reflection journals you can do on your phone. It has it's encrypted and has like a passcode, so if you drop your phone or whatever, and like if your screen turns off, the encryption comes on. So so you can really, really put your deepest, darkest thoughts into it. But
it's the lock for your Dear Diary.
Yeah, it is. But it also has so it's the journal. It also has a meditation, not the guided, like if you like the calm or like the simple whatever. It's not that. It's sort of like unguided, like a timer with a bell, like whatever you want. But it's lovely. It also has various quotes and affirmations you can get each day. And then also like breathing stuff, like breathing exercises you can do. It's a lovely little like self-care app. It's the aesthetics of it. We're on a podcast, so I can't like show you that, but the aesthetics are very
stoic.
Very stoic. It's very like
minimalist.
Mm-hmm. It's lovely. You can kind of set it so like when you open it up, it has your favorite things to do on it or whatever. So big fan of Stoic. If you're listening, Stoic, I would like a free subscription to go with this.
See, this way you can.
It's very cheap too.
You can immerse yourself in the barrage of color and music and makeup inside of influencer world, and then
and then do a meditation.
Shift to your app. Switch from that app to an app where you can breathe.
And I've always like I've always wanted to be a journaler, but I'm bad at it.
Ooh, so doing it on your phone makes you better
So
at it?
doing it on my phone, because I can
Interesting.
do it very short. It gives you prompts if you want them.
You're
And
tweeting to yourself.
yes, I'm just basically writing text messages to myself. And I find that very helpful. It's much easier than trying to feel like I have to write, and it has prompts. So I'm not just staring at a blank page. There are moments when I'm doing stuff I want to stare at a blank page and I'm like coming up with ideas or something. But
You have unintentionally but successfully brought us completely full circle.
I'm performing for myself.
Back around to
Yeah.
my saying, that sounds interesting for you. I don't understand at all.
Thanks for listening to Cult Favorite. Join us. You can subscribe to the podcast on either Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And when you subscribe, be sure to leave a rating and a review. You can also follow us on X or Instagram at Cult Favorite Pod. We would love to hear your feedback. DM us or leave a comment on this episode in Spotify. Special thanks to the Department of Religious Studies at the University of Alabama for production assistance. We'll see you next time.